Hi everyone. Have you ever wondered if what's going on with you or your child has anything to do with generational trauma? So we're going to dive into that subject today because that is a subject that a lot of people are talking about, and I know it's something that I personally have experience with. And so we're going to dive into that subject today. But for those of you that are new here, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. I'm really glad you found the channel, but I also know that if you're here, it's likely because you have something going on with your adult son or daughter and that you're looking for some guidance on. And so you've come to the right place. I'm a mom that walked a rough road with my own daughter for about 10 years, and I made a lot of mistakes along the way. And so now I am blessed to be able to coach moms and help the mom get their own life back in the midst of all the chaos, right? So I'm glad you're here. Hit subscribe if you want to be notified of future videos. But today, let's dive into this subject of generational trauma. Some examples of generational trauma in my own life and that I see very frequently in many of your lives. One is addiction, right? Have you ever, and if it's not your family, think about friends or coworkers or somebody that you talk with. Have you ever heard someone say, my grandpa was an alcoholic, my dad was an alcoholic, and my sibling or myself has a drinking problem? Do you think that's coincidence? Another one is suicide tendencies. That is something that actually ran in my family quite a bit, and I definitely was affected by that personally. And so that was something that I dealt with for many years, not understanding why. I always just blamed it on my circumstances. So another one is violence, unfortunately. Domestic abuse, violence in general. And so, addiction, suicide, violence, those are just three of many, many, many generational traumas that can be passed along through generations. And for those of you that have a strong faith, you're probably going to deal with it a little bit differently than maybe someone who thinks differently. But just so you know, I want you to look at the symptoms, right? The symptoms of generational trauma are anger. That's number one, anger. That one gets passed down, and it's almost like because we don't have the control over, what's going on. Those types of people who are affected by generational trauma typically have a hard time trusting others. They become very fearful, and they have an inability to connect with other people to form really, really solid relationships. So all of these kinds of things that I'm mentioning here these were all very personal for me. And I just want you to know that if that is something that you are seeing, you're like, yep, this is happening to me. Or, not to say it doesn't skip generations sometimes, but usually if it's generational trauma, some people say that's just a name. Well, yeah, my great grandpa, my grandpa, my dad, and now me, or my brother or whomever. So when you see it go through a lineage like that, usually, there's a generational piece to it. Usually it's traumatic. You'll also hear about that when someone has cancer, right? Well, mom had this or grandma had this, so that means I'm going to get that. And so again, it's a generational thing. Not to say that your genes don't play, a part in all of that kind of stuff. But my point is that the generational, the trauma piece, the traumatic piece that most of your sons or daughters and maybe yourself are experiencing. I can only speak for myself, but I knew very well that addiction ran in my family, right? I knew very well that suicide ran in my family from generations. It went back. And what did I do about it, right? So if you identify it and you're like, yeah, this does run in my family. Well, you know what? The buck stops here. And that's what I did. And you have to name it. You have to claim it. You have to say, yep, this is what it is. I identify it, but don't own it. Don't own it and say, it's just the way it is. My grandpa was an alcoholic. My dad, my son, my daughter, myself. And it's just the way it is. It just runs in the family. That is so not necessary. So I just want you to know that, and you need to look at it, and you need to, like I said, name it and claim it for what it is, but don't own it. And that you have to, it stops with you. It has to stop with you. Because when I ended the generational trauma in my family, I know that my children are not going to have addiction issues. I know that my children are not going to have the suicidal tendencies the way I did, right? Does that mean we're going to be perfect? Of course not. But at the end of the day, that's really what I ended the curse, if you want to look at it that way. The generational trauma curse, in a sense of, you know what? These 4 or 5 generations had this. Maybe they didn't know how to stop it. But for me as a Christian, the way I stop it, because doesn't come from God, this comes from our enemy, right? The enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And so what you need to do is to stop that dead in its tracks. And so for me as a Christian, in the name of Jesus, I declare this generational trauma stopped here. This lineage, this issue, this addiction, this suicidal tendencies will not have any covering over my family, my daughters, my my children, my grandchildren, or any future generation. The buck stops here. And so that is what I have done. And I can tell you that when I've done that personally, I have not had suicidal issues. I was able to quit drinking on my own. Well, with the Lord's help, but I didn't go to rehab. I didn't do all of the things that most people do. And I'm telling you that not because I am better, but because I just gave it to Him. I gave it to the Lord. And so I am excited. I would love to hear if there's any types of generational things going on in your family that you would like to share. I know it's a touchy subject, but if you are interested in sharing, please do. And put that in the comments, and we'd love to respond to that. So I hope that helped you, and I will see you next time. Thanks.